Welcome to Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville. Join 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller, of course, with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and a special guest who's going to be joining us for the next two shows, this program and one after, when we're going to be talking about journalism in the first show, and then we're going to talk about what's covered in that journalism in the second show. Very happy to introduce Mark Woods, who I know most of you should know if you don't, but columnist with the Times-Union. And Mark, it's a great pleasure to have you on Mike's on Mike, and thanks very much for being willing to join us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Good. For those who may not be that familiar with you, there may be two people in the entire audience who might not know. Give us some background of how you got into this whole thing.
Well, I came to Jacksonville in 2001 as sports columnist to replace a Mike Bianchi.
Right.
In fact,
I remember Mike.
In fact, there was for a while there, Mike was pretty entrenched, so I'd get emails where that were addressed to Mike. For quite a while there.
That's right. He used to call me Mark, so we're all even.
Yeah. So Bianchi left and went to. I knew Bianchi and I worked together at Florida Today in Melbourne. So I knew him beforehand, and when he was leaving, he'd tell me, you should apply for this. And I ended up coming up here, doing that for 2 years. And in the spring of 2003, editor asked me if I wanted to switch to the Metro side. And that was probably one of the toughest decisions in my career, because I had always wanted to be a sports columnist and worked very hard to kind of rise up and do that job, and to kind of walk away from it was a really tough call. And I kind of often think it was kind of two things. My daughter was born in 2001, and I kind of thought, do I want to be gone every single weekend and be in press boxes? And that was kind of the life of being a sports writer, sports columnist. And then I think, not to be melodramatic, but I think 9/11 kind of affected me. Do I want to be writing about sports? It seemed, it seemed so trivial at the time. And although there are times now when I think the non-sports things are sillier and wackier than anything in sports.
Who was the sports editor when you were there? Was Castell still around?
Chet Fussman was sports editor.
I didn't know him.
Yeah. No, he was a good guy. Chet left a few years ago, like many former TU staffers.
Yeah, Bianchi's done pretty good.
He's in Orlando now. Yeah, Bianchi's doing well. Yeah. He's got a radio show in the morning and still writing columns for the Sentinel.
Was it harder to write for Metro than it was to write for sports, or vice versa?
It's very different. I was writing, four columns a week at least for sports, and in some ways that's a grind, but in other ways you go to a Gator game on Saturday and you don't really prepare. Something's going to present itself, or FSU game. Kind of always went to a college game, Jaguars game on Sunday. And then you come up with a couple things during the week. When I switched to Metro and knew I'd be writing fewer, I thought, this will be easy. And quickly learned it's kind of...
Especially in Jacksonville.
Yeah, right. I think it's kind of, the whole the world is your oyster is both kind of a blessing and a curse. You're kind of constantly... you can go a zillion different directions. I remember I talked to... there was another sports writer out in California who'd switched to Metro, and I talked to him, and he said, it's been good, but he said, I'm constantly thinking, he said, I'll be out at dinner, and I'll see the way the waiter sets down a couple salt shakers or whatever, and I'll think, is that a column? Everything. He said, I just can't kind of shut it off, and now I can kind of relate to that, how you're kind of constantly thinking of what's the next column, and kind of second guessing, is this the right way to go? And so that's kind of a perpetual thing that has not changed even after doing it for 20 years.
I'm sure you get a lot of suggestions.
Oh yeah. I mean, some of them are very good, and some of them are pretty bad.
You ignore mine.
No, you've had good ones.
Mike, we ignore all yours. all of us do.
I would think being a sports columnist first and a sports writer is good training to become what you are now, a great columnist. I mean, it gives you latitude that you don't necessarily have in the news side to do that. You could exercise some,
right.
you know?
Right. No, I think sports writing is kind of this underrated. People think because it's the, kind of the toy department, they think, but there's a lot of great sports writing, and I think a lot of freedom in storytelling, and like when I talk to classes and tell them, you don't be a sports writer because you love sports. You have to love the idea of telling stories, of writing a story, because the love of sports will wear off. The idea, that there's a certain thrill that I'm going to be in the press box at this big game, that wears off pretty quickly, and so you have to have a love for the actual job, which is not sitting there watching the game. It's what you do, before and after. And
when I grew up as a big fan of Furman Bisher and Blackie Sherrard in Dallas, and believe it or not, Louis Grizzard used to work for me. He was my sports editor.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So I understand the game from that side.
Yeah, when I was a young sports writer, I was able to meet some of those. I met Furman Bisher and Edwin, because I covered the Dolphins. Edwin Pope down in Miami was in that school.
He was in that group.
I was at a bar in San Francisco where he got cut off. They said, "You've had too much to drink, sir," and which I don't think he really had. But so we went in. When he went into the Hall of Fame, I said, "I'm honored to be have been kicked out of a bar with someone that's now in the Hall of Fame."
Now, you came from Orlando here.
I came from Palm Beach, the Palm Beach Post. I was covering
in 2001.
Yeah, I was covering the Dolphins for a while, and then I had become a sports columnist at the Palm Beach Post. But yeah, I worked in Orlando, covered the Magic for a while. For Florida Today, worked in Tampa, covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I lived all over the state covering sports before coming here.
Well, given those four cities, what was Jacksonville in 2001 like when you got here, and how did it if you came from Palm Beach, was there an aha moment, or was there how was it to walk into Jacksonville after Palm Beach?
Well, I had been here often for either, like, I think the last event I covered here was the 62-7 Jaguars over the Dolphins game. Covering the Dolphins, Dan Marino and Jimmy Johnson's last game. But I've been up here for NFL games, for quite a few for Georgia, and a lot of stuff not necessarily in Jacksonville, but in Gainesville and in North Florida. And I always loved the northern part of the state. I mean, I felt like it's just a beautiful part of the state. And I had people down there that said, "You're moving to Jacksonville," and they thought I was just doing it for the job, but that was only a piece of it. It was I wanted to live here. I liked the size of the city, and I liked a lot of things about the city. So I was excited it wasn't coming in blind. There certainly were a lot of things I didn't know about Jacksonville, but I'd been here enough I think I had a pretty good sense of what it would be like to live here.
As a chronicler of Jacksonville, tell us how you think the city's changed in both good and bad ways in the last decade and a half.
I think I guess I would say it's growing, and that's both good and bad. Like the growth, you talk to anybody who's been here a while, and they'll be like, "I remember when there were cows here and there," or, it's definitely the way it's developed and taken off growth-wise is can be positive, but I think it can be a negative. But then it's also grown. I think it's evolved in ways that in the 20 years, that things that just wouldn't have happened in Jacksonville 20 years ago. The HRO, there's certain things where I feel like it's moved forward in what I would consider a positive way, and it's grown in that way. In a lot of ways, it's the same city, and that's both good and bad. But it definitely has changed in the last 20 years, and I know if I talk to anybody who's been here longer than that, anytime you write about a certain area, and they have the "I remember when" stories. Yeah,
I remember when I had my first meeting with with the CEO of the JTA when I got my job here, and one of the things I asked him, because I had never been here, this was in 2000, and he had said that Jacksonville was still looking for what it wanted to be when it grew up. And he says that to this day.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think that's pretty prophetic. I don't think we really do know what we want to be when we grow up.
The other thing that people often said is that everybody is related in Jacksonville, and that's probably something that we still are the biggest little town. I mean, there are no secrets. And
Still Comfort, huh?
yeah, but I think that's still what makes us neat, is that we still have that small town. Even though we've got a lot of communities, it's still a small town.
Mike Hightower and I have this discussion, been having it for several years, 30 years probably. We've had the opportunity, being here as long as we have, to know a lot of the leaders, civic and political, in Jacksonville over the last 40 years or more. And we've come to points at certain times when we see that, especially community leaders, getting older, moving on, dying or retiring. And we always keep asking, who's going to take their place? Who's going to fill those shoes? And we're at that point now, we think. We have this conversation a lot. What do you think? Where are the people who are going to be the leaders? Where are they going to come from over the next decade?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel pretty hopeful about where we are, but you're right. There has been some. I remember when I first got here, one of the biggest political names was Jim King, and I always thought like he represented kind of this moderate middle ground, which seems to have disappeared in the last couple decades. And but yeah, you had folks like yourselves behind the scenes, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were talking earlier. My friend David Miller has stepped up and been very involved with, I think, wanting to see Jacksonville move in positive ways, and his name just comes off the top of my head, but there's others like him that I think have that genuine passion about trying to move the city and make things happen to improve us. So I'm hopeful about where we are right now, and I think, sometimes it feels, I've written a column many times about frustration over this or that not happening, but if you step back from a longer lens, things have happened and are happening. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic about where we are right now.
Given that, ask him if he had a magic wand, what he would do.
Yeah, I was going to say is, given the fact is that you've been here now 20 some odd years, and you've written about it, and obviously you have enjoyed this community, and you've watched. If you could change one thing to make us better, or just change it, what would you do?
I mean, I think the riverfront, because we've been talking about it since before I got it. I mean, even I was aware of that being a talk when I'd visit here for Florida-Georgia games, like, oh, wow, this has so much potential, and here we are 20 years later. In that, before I moved here in the 90s, I lived in Tampa, and our riverfront is way more vibrant than Tampa's was at that point, and now it's way ahead of ours. It was blighted and dead, and I'd go for a run downtown Tampa on a weekend, and you would not see a soul, and the riverfront was trashed, and it was. Now you go there and it's
pristine.
It's almost shocking how much has happened both there and St. Pete.
What did they do, though, Mark, that we haven't done? How were they able to accomplish that?
Yeah, they had Scenic Jacksonville had Bob Buckhorn, the longtime mayor, come and talk, and he talked about that, and he said, because he gets a lot of the credit for their riverfront. He said, I forget what, I'm going to botch it, but he basically says it's like 6 mayors and 40 years in the making, kind of, that he gives credit. And I thought about that, how each of our mayors, going back to Jake and others in the hands, each has moved it forward. It's just somehow we haven't managed to completely change it. So, but what he said they did was they invested in themselves. They basically, it's something that's been my passion is parks. And he said, we created these riverfront parks, and because of that, the investment came. You want private. We talk all the time about private-public partnerships, and and I think sometimes here we've expected the private development to lead to the riverfront taking off. And what he said there was they created the river walks, they created the public parks, they invested a lot of money and got grants and used taxpayer money and did a lot of things to create that. And once that happened, it just exploded.
And they had the lightning guy.
Yeah, he invested a ton of money.
He invested a ton of money down there, which is good.
Yep.
To tell you a little story about the river. I worked for Mayor Tansler, and we did River Day when they cleaned up the river.
Mm-hmm.
And that river project, it gets overlooked. Not River Day, but the river project itself. And I remember the night that the landing opened. And Mayor Godbolt had a big party upstairs in the landing at one of the restaurants. And I was sitting there at the table with him and some others, and I looked over on the other side of the room, and there was Mayor Tansler standing there all by himself, which is not unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And I got up and I walked over to him, and I said, Hans, I want you to know something. If you hadn't cleaned this damn river, the landing wouldn't be here right now. None of this would be happening.
Right.
And that's exactly, but we overlook that. I think it doesn't get enough attention.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, last year I did a column on how it was the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, and how we're kind of a prime example of what cleaning up the river, how it makes a difference. Because you're right, that was our reputation. Talk about we didn't have an identity. Once upon a time, the identity was it was paper mills, and it was not a pretty place, and that laid the foundation. Well, if the river isn't cleaned up, there's no way we talk about all these other things. And to this day, it still has issues, and we still have to be worried about it. But if it was, if it weren't cleaned up, forget about having.
I used to walk from the Times Union to City Hall along what was then Coastline Drive back then. This was before the river project started. It was back 69, 70. And you can't even begin to imagine what that river was like. You could walk across from one side to the other on top of the sewage.
Yeah.
Because at any time a toilet was flushed in downtown, there was 77 outfalls, and it went straight into the river.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And when picking up on that, when you think of the leadership of Tansler cleaning it up, and of course this comes back more to Mike, where he went to San Antonio and they basically took a ditch and made a big deal. And I remember Jake coming back and said, do you have any idea what they're doing in San Antonio? And it's a ditch, and we've got this river, and just the commitment and the dedication and the vision of Tansler and Jake together, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
The mayor of San Antonio on that trip, Jake said, I love your river walk. I want your river walk. And the mayor of San Antonio replied, I'll give you my river walk if you'll give me your river.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is basically a ditch. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. You see that and see what they've done with it. And yeah. And
it's just we don't have the consistency in administrations. It's like every new mayor's got to come in with their own program.
Well, they
Renaissance plan.
And thank God that's going on right now.
There's somewhere in City Hall there must be a group of 3-ring binders that every mayor has said this is what my downtown's going to look like, and that's where we've made a mistake. When you look at the big cities, the city fathers and mothers got together and said this is going to be our 20-year plan, and then what they did said we will support you for election if you will support our plan. If you don't, then we're not going to support you. That's how they got there. And unfortunately, and with all due respect, every mayor comes in and said this is what I'm going to do, and as soon as they get there, their first priority is to get reelected. It's not the 3-ring binder, and we've got it backwards.
I've got 2 big 3-ring binders at home from Convention City task forces that I sat on that are just sitting there collecting dust. But I mean, we put a lot of energy into the idea of what do we do with the Prime Osborne and where do we go with it. And not one word of that study ever came in.
And that really underscores what Mark said, what the mayor said. He said the city decided, the community decided what the park was going to look like, and then the developers came afterwards. And we're, maybe at some point we have Lori Boyer down here, and let's talk about, what DDA is going to do and how that can fit into this puzzle. Anyway, but thanks for being here. So your magic wand is the river.
I think so. I mean, if you gave me one, I was trying to think of others, I've made bike and pedestrian issues have kind of been one of my passions in parks. So, I think, since I've been here, that's another thing, refrain. One of the reasons I wanted to move here was I knew how much preservation land and how much parks, all these stats about parks. And that's there is a difference there between South Florida. They don't have nearly as much parks, but what they do have there, they've done really well, and they've invested in. They maintain. They have the infrastructure to have access. And so when I got here, I realized, we do our parks on the cheap, and however you measure it, per capita, per acre, per whatever. So I would invest more. And we've kind of, it feels like we're perpetually talking about not having just the biggest park system, having the best. And that was one of Mayor Payton's mantras, and I think he genuinely wanted to change that. And I think each mayor has, but that one hit tough economic times. So it's one of those, I think, again, probably needs that consistency to say we're going to, this really could be, back to our identity, could be part of it, that we're old Florida, we're natural Florida. That's, we're not trying to be Disney, we're not trying to be South Beach, but this is what we want to be, and we're not just going to say it, we're going to do it.
Right now, the city is more flush for money than it has been a good while, I think. What do you think Mayor Deacon's going to do? What is her commitment to the park system?
I think she obviously is passionate about the environment and healthcare and being active. I mean, that's the other piece, I think, of what could be our identity, is just this that health and fitness and wellness. And so you tie in the hospitals that we have here, the medical care, with all our natural resources. So I think those are things she gets and cares about. So again, I'm kind of optimistic that hopefully we'll move the needle there.
Boulder, Colorado would be a good template to use when you're talking about healthier America, because they do such a fine job. And again, that's where the focus of politics is. It's they've got it up there and saying, what are we doing today to make people of our city healthier?
Maybe that's where the chamber should go.
That'd be good. I'll do that trip.
Going back to the river, though, one of the things that one of your columns that you've written about so much is paddleboarding in the river. Just share a little bit about what that's like from your perspective.
It's fun. It's probably something I guess I got into 10, 15 years ago. And I love Florida, and I love Jacksonville, but I do kind of often miss the mountains and things like that of the West. Not that I only lived out West for a few years, but I will say that, I don't own a boat. So this is finally, I feel like it's opened up a whole new world to me, that I'm out on the water on my paddleboard. And we started doing it. We have a group of 3 or 4 of us that probably have paddled downtown more than probably anybody else in town. Sometimes we often go down to Julington, Durbin Creek, and it's beautiful and pristine and nice and flat, and it's blocked from the wind. Downtown, I always tell people, can get a little challenging. You have to, the tides, the chop, it's not really a place to just throw your board out or throw a kayak and first time go out there, but it is pretty amazing to be out there. Like this time of year, you often have dolphins out there, and so here you are in this city of 1 million people, and you're out there and looking around, and you're paddling right through the middle of it. And I love that we have that kind of urban paddling, that we have someone where like I said, Julington, Durbin. There's a bunch of others like that, or that obviously can go out in the ocean. So we have. What's the stat? We have 1,000 miles of shoreline in Duval County. It really is there are a few places probably in the country that have the kind of water kayaking, paddleboarding kind of options that we have right here.
You know,
Go ahead.
I had the Cypress Gardens and the SeaWorld skiers come in downtown.
Right.
And both groups told me after they had skied down there between the Friendship Park and the other side of the North Bank that what we ought to do is have an extreme ski contest because the currents was so fast and it was so hard to do that would be a good draw down there. We never did it, but I don't know why we didn't do it. I guess we just ran out of time. But you're right. I don't know how you paddleboard down there. How long have you been paddleboarding?
It's probably been 10, 15 years. And yeah, the first year or so fell a lot and you just over time you get more comfortable and it's still fall, but like this time of year the water feels good. You're happy to get wet.
How often do you go?
Lately I haven't been doing it as much. This summer's probably been the least I've done it just because I've been trying to get ready for this hike I'm doing in a couple weeks. But up until this, probably a couple times a week, a few times a month. And I tend to always try and we go early and try and I tend to try and take a picture or two, and so people see those and often comment on so I like that, trying to capture a pretty photo when I go out in the morning.
Let me segue into the question about parks and your love affair with nature. I mean, the paddleboarding is just one part of it. You have consistently visited national parks, and you've written a book, Lassoing the Sun. Where you got the book?
Just happened to bring the book.
Talk to
Put
us.
it up to let me do it.
Yeah.
You go ahead and talk.
Talk to us about that love affair. Why do you go in those parks and spend so much time there?
I think it goes back to childhood. Those are, I have these memories of, and I think I read about it in the book. Like I couldn't tell you what I got for Christmas when I was 8 years old. At the time, I'm sure it was a big deal, but I can vividly tell you about going to Redwood National Park. I can picture the campsite. I can picture what it smelled like, what the trees looked like, what the stars looked like, and so that my parents didn't have much money. My dad was a Baptist minister. My mom was a teacher and social worker, and at the time was envious of the kids with money. And now I look back that they gave us we'd take these old-fashioned like movie Vacation, these cross-country road trips in the station wagon, pile in the car, and I had two sisters, and we'd be in the back seat fighting over the space, and you stay on your side, and
he touched me, Mom. He
right.
So, are we there yet?
Exactly. So I don't know how my parents did.
I need to go, Dad. I need to go.
So
I told you to go before you got in the car.
There's
Exactly.
We've all been in that car.
Yeah. So I don't know how my parents did that. I think back on those road trips, but now I appreciate that and all these. And my mom would tell stories about having to go on little hikes, and you have to bribe us with M&Ms and things, And so at the time, I realized it wasn't like I was going, "This is great." I think there were moments when I thought it was great, but it sinks in. I think it sinks in a way. It plants seeds in you. That is my daughter loves Disney. I've never been a big fan of going to theme parks. I tell her my happy place is national parks, and it still is. I see one of those signs when you're entering, and I'm instantly kind of okay. I'm excited. I'm happy, and
I bet you and Mark Middlebrook have had an awful lot of good conversations about it.
Yeah.
Mark loves national parks.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us about Lassoing the Sun. How did you write that? Why did you write that? And what is it about?
So I guess it was 2011. I got an email, came into my inbox, and I know I deleted it at least once, I think 2 or 3 times. And I finally read it, and it was about this Eugene Pulliam Fellowship, which is basically the Society of Professional Journalists, which is based out of Indianapolis, awards to one writer each year, basically to kind of allow you to pursue a dream project, like you get a sabbatical year. So I read it and I thought about it like, well, I don't know what I'd do. And I looked at the previous winners, and they were kind of these really heavy, meaty topics, whatever you'd kind of think of today, politics and education, gun violence, whatever. And I thought, I don't even know if I'd really want to immerse myself in any of these for a year. I want to get away from them. I'd want to go to national parks for a year. And I started thinking about it. Well, it was, the Centennial National Parks is 2016, and, there's all these people who have kind of documented the history, beautifully and wonderfully, from Ansel Adams to Ken Burns. But what is the future of the national park? So that in a nutshell was this. I wrote like a 20-page proposal that was, what is the future of the national parks? Let me go, give me this fellowship, and I'll spend a year going to national parks trying to answer that question.
Tough assignment.
Yeah. So
Throw me into that woodpile.
yeah, right. So then February, 5 weeks into that year, my mom, who was as healthy as any 70-something I knew that hiked every day, she was, she hadn't been feeling quite right, and doctor told, she ended up in the hospital right before I got there, and doctor said, you have a huge inoperable tumor, and you're basically you're dying. There's nothing we can do. So the book, the year kind of initially made me think I had this golden ticket, and all of a sudden it was meaningless. But the more I thought about it, my mom wanted to continue on the plan. It made it even more meaningful, because that was, we all cope in different ways. And she died on June 30th of that year that I had off, which is, to me, even that feels kind of symbolic, the exact midpoint of the year. So to me, the first half of the year was, how do we cope with, we're going to lose someone. The second half was, how do we move on after losing someone? And in both cases, for me, the national parks, or in general, the natural places that both my mom and dad loved so much, was how I did that. So that's the long version of what the book set out to be and what it became.
Interesting.
It really is.
Wow.
I want to ask one quick question before we wrap up this half hour, and that is, we haven't talked at all about your profession. Where do you see the print media in 10 years from now?
Well, I mean, I hate to say it, but yeah, the print part, I just don't know. It's
I didn't know how to distinguish that part of journalism from broadcast journalism and others.
10 years ago, I would have said, of course, newspapers are going to be here a long, long time in that form. Now, I do think, it's only a matter of time. It's almost like this remains this miracle that I still get the print product, and it's thrown, it comes off a press somewhere and it's thrown in my driveway. But I think there will be a time when that doesn't happen, and whether it's, but that doesn't mean, this is what everybody's trying to figure out. How do we evolve? Is it on iPads? Is it on phones? And there will always be journalism. But I am saddened by the idea that, I love looking at microfilm, and I can go to a certain day in history and pull up the microfilm from the Jacksonville Journal or the Florida Times Union, and you talk about Riverdale. What was in the paper the next day? And I know, it's the first draft of history, and it's flawed what's there. We're human. We get things wrong. We don't see the big picture. But there is something about being able to go back and look at that one specific day. So I am saddened that it may just kind of morph into this kind of never-ending digital thing that doesn't have the on this day and time kind of sense.
Yeah, one day there will be a day when we're gone, and the people who know about what it feels like to have that newspaper in their hands, that they won't be around anymore. They're not learning that now. They're growing up with that phone.
And you know what? It's not different from what we're doing right now. I mean, this would normally be on a traditional radio station, like I did for 35 years, and now it's all morphing into podcasts and other online services.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to continue. They've already talked about getting rid of the AM band in new cars because no one's listening to it anymore.
Well, then the question I have to you, Mark, is the profession of, quote, true journalism also going to have to morph into something? And what do you see that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it is. Everybody's trying to do that, and it feels like the last, I don't know how long, they've been trying to figure out how it morphs. And younger journalists are, I think are very multimedia savvy. You know, when we were coming up, you picked a path. I mean, there was a certain path where I had to, do I want to be a writer or an editor? And I was like, I don't think I want to be an editor. And my when I was in undergrad, my degree was in, my emphasis was photojournalism. That's what I wanted to be, was a photographer. And now that probably would be a strength. Oh, you can both shoot and you can write. That's probably a plus. But you know, in the old days, yeah, you picked your lane and you stuck to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way it morphs, is that you know, the younger reporters can do things with you know, videos and things that I'm just not savvy at, that they're really good at. And I think that's, storytelling will be told in different ways. And so I try and learn some of these things, but yeah, it's constantly changing.
I don't know if you remember, but on Saturday Night Live, when Al Franken was one of the staff members, he used to do this piece where he would be wearing a satellite dish on top of his head,
Right.
and he'd have the camera that would be extended from his body, and he was basically telling us years before it happened that the idea of having a shooter, having a photographer helping you with the story is long gone. Now you've got to do it all, you know, and that's basically what's happened.
Yeah,
That's
and you
where
see
it's gone.
you see the TV journalists doing that, where it
Yeah.
used to be, you'd have the videographer and the reporter. Now they're doing one of them. Yeah, so they have to be multi-talented too.
No question about it. Mark, thank you for spending this first half hour with
Thank
us.
you.
Mark is going to stay with us here, and next week you will hear him talk more now about some of the issues that he is writing about and some of the issues he hasn't yet written about. So stick around for our next episode. Meanwhile, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Mark.
you, Mark.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and Mike Miller can be found at your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook and YouTube. Learn more at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversations with Mike's on Mike.